Hello, and thanks for tuning in to an all-new episode of FSP Overtime. It's I, Jason Burgos, the regular co-host of the Fight Strength podcast, but I won't be joined by my compadre of podcasting, Phil Daru. No, he is off in Vancouver, Canada, running seminars. So instead, for this edition, I have the ultimate fill-in, the ultimate pinch hitter, understudy, the Fight Strength podcast regular, man of many skills. He's the multi-masters holder, multi-doctorate, badass strength and conditioning coach of Longo and Weidman MMA. The one, the only, Tony Ricci. Tony, what's going on?
Thank you, Jace, for the introduction. Out of all those titles, the fill-in for FSP is of the greatest honor. I'll have you know.
Wow, you hear that, listeners? That's quite a compliment.
Off bench.
From the man that has worked with champions and stars, that's saying a lot, but I'll take it. It's pretty cool.
Yep, we'll go with that, my friend. I'm off the bench for FSP. I'm proud anytime.
And this is sort of like if you have an all-star. Somehow you had an all-star injured or something like that. He's not playing regularly, but you can just bring in an all-star off the bench to pinch hit. I mean, I don't know any other podcast on the planet that can have someone the caliber of a Tony Ricci just step in on short notice. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, and stepping in for Mr. Daru, I'm very happy for that, man. He's getting some great recognition, all of which is deserved. He's, being requested throughout the world now to bring his product out there. And Jason, I mean it, as I said, as a strength coach, I'm more of a GM now, sitting back like the general manager. Phil would be one of my first draft picks, if not the. That young man is working hard, and I'm really happy to see him gain some good recognition,
All right, so I mean, everybody that listens to the show, you know how we do it. This is more a show just talking straight MMA conversation, just talking about the industry, talking trash, all kinds of conversation and opinions. I mean, we'll jump right into it. It's a kind of a two-part topic to start it off. Back and forth has been going on between Luke Rockhold and Alexander Gustafsson, as Luke Rockhold keeps, possibly hinting at a move to 205. I mean, the question I wanted to ask you, and we'll talk about, is moving up to 205 really the right move for Luke Rockhold? I mean, is that a fight he can win? I mean, that seems like he's biting off quite a piece of difficult competition to have to move up and face a guy of that caliber right away.
Agreed. If you're looking at fighting him, Gustafsson, that's a problem because obviously he's a big 205, right? He's not a small 205.
He's actually talked about heavyweight possibly as a thing he might do.
Exactly. So that's a tough step only because of his skill level, the skill level you're going to be confronting, an experienced fighter, and again, a guy who is what Luke is to middles, he is to light heavies, really.
Yeah.
Sometimes you look at him and wonder how'd he make it.
Yeah.
And so you could argue that, it may not be a bad move. And something I always caution. So I've got some very good friends who spend a lot of time with Luke at Hard Knocks 365, right? You got Henry Hooft, a great man, great coach. My good friend Corey Peacock, a friend of both Phil and I, who's a strength coach down there. And so they're very close with him. They're working inside with Luke. They know what's going on. So it's very difficult to speculate on what somebody should or shouldn't do unless you've been heavily invested into their time and into the camp and you know what's going on, how they're feeling. He didn't look good against Romero, that's for sure. And I mean just walking out, he didn't look good. And I know that team down there does some wonderful work. So you can assume that they probably did everything in correctly, and Luke still struggled this time. As you get older, making that weight is going to become tougher and tougher. Yeah. Not just because of metabolism, but I got to tell you, it's probably structurally, Jason, where Luke, you're still, man, muscle density grows even in your 30s. Bone density grows. You're putting weight on in ways you don't even perceive. So first, I'm talking strictly from the physiological standpoint. It's probably not a bad move from him from a performance side.
Yeah.
He's almost 6'4", Luke?
Yeah, he's a big boy.
Right? So he could go in. He probably fights around 212 anyway. So maybe he'd be a bit on the lighter side as a light heavy, but simultaneously he'd be fast, he'd be strong, he wouldn't have to deplete himself from the cut. So from that standpoint, you could look back and say it's probably not a bad move strategically, right? But again, I don't know if that's the first guy I want to step into bumping up.
Yeah.
That's a tough fight for anyone when he's on too. How's that?
I mean, the question, and it's a good question, especially for you as a strength coach. I mean, you are a person that will advise a fighter, advise their coach and such thing. What do you feel are like the signs that, okay, maybe a move up or down, but let's say up, is a smart move? Because you have guys, say like a James Vick in, I think he's at 155, that, yeah, he's huge, or even Gustafsson or whatever, he's huge, but they make the weight fine, and they fight there fine, and they've been really good at that weight class. So, you know, some people seem to, while large, they make the weight fine. Like even a guy like Jamie Alvarez that I fight I've interviewed, he's a big guy, but he fights at 125 easily.
Yep.
But then there's some guys that, like a BJ Penn, like his optimal weight and his best was 155, but he went to 170 and he wasn't quite the same. I'm sure he was thinking, you know, no more weight cuts. I don't like doing that kind of stuff. This is going to be easier for me. Is there a certain thing that as a strength coach you say, okay, this is the thing that makes me say, okay, he has to maybe move up? And then are there situations where a guy, it maybe not the best move to move up. Maybe they're just better built for a certain division and they shouldn't be moving around.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's multifaceted regarding the answer, because obviously the first decision goes to skilled coaches, right? So, you know, sometimes in strength and conditioning, and I'm going to say this straight out, I look at some strength coaches, I think they put a little too much emphasis on their value. I mean, technically we're not a third base coach. Okay. Or, you know, I mean, there's quite a few coaches before. So those decisions inherently will come from that side of the team. But when you look at somebody, okay, so here's a couple of things. Look at what their walk-around weight is, okay, and how they perform at it. So and I'm throwing out hypotheticals. I know very little about Luke. But let's say Luke walks around and practices and runs around at about 212.
Okay.
And is quite effective at that weight. When I say effective, it's a nice marriage of power. So what we're always trying to do as strength coaches is a negotiation. Marry all the different abilities. In better words, somebody may be able to go up a class and they're going to be more powerful, but then they lose endurance and speed. Somebody may go down, have a little bit of endurance and speed, but then they lose all their power. So what we're trying to do is try to get that weight and find out and monitor performance and say, okay, well, this guy has been really sharp at 212, and now he's coming all the way down to 185. And if we were to know that through experience with the fighter, measuring physiological capacity, that could be heart rate recoveries, that could be a host of different things. There's ways to measure speed and agility and all the different testing. And if they're performing at a weight well above the scale weight, then I think you can say, you know, this guy, it might be worth it. It might be worth it for them to bump up to that class. Yeah. And that's something we really have to consider. I think is not just to say, well, he's more of a bantam, or he's more of a light, or he's more of a light heavy. The question is, how are they functioning physiologically at a particular weight that they will, when they're going to be in that bumped up class. So again, to reiterate, I've never worked with Luke, but if he's fighting at 215, and that would not be unheard of, that kind of rehydration, a 30-pound rehy in a 6'4" man, well, then maybe it's worth him for him to stay at the 205, have a cruise control cut, and then see. You watch. You have to watch the fighters function. You have to watch their capacity. This is why I think it's very important, and Phil and I have discussed this, to be in the fight gyms. Because inherently, you need to get some way of assessing, not just numerical measurements, but you need to know if what you're doing is helping. Yeah. And if you're not watching your fighter fight, you really don't know. But I think that's the key, Jason, is to go in and say, okay, this guy's best fight weight is 203, so hypothetical. So obviously, even if the weight cut is tough, you don't want to bump him to 205.
Right.
All right. So that's what you got to look at. And what is the marriage of power, speed, strength? If you move somebody up and 3 or 4 of those abilities decline, it's not worth it. If you move him down, or 2 or 3 or 4 of those abilities decline, it's not worth it. It has to be a nice marriage of everything.
Yeah. I mean, what would, like, I'm always, it's curious, because when someone has such success like he's had, that it would seem like a dangerous thing to move around, because he's done so well. I mean, maybe it's his losses are less about his physicality and more about just mistakes in his training. But I mean, you've been around a lot of fighters, a lot of weights, a lot of ages, gender. I mean, how could you quickly explain, like, how much people always hear about, it gets harder to cut weight as you get older? Like, could you explain, like, specifically, even on a physiological level, why it does get harder to cut weight, and why maybe if Luke Rockhold was 25, maybe doesn't make sense to go up even at his size, but because he's getting older, if it is difficult for him, why it is hard to cut weight as you get older?
Really great question. I think it's a multitude of factors. One, okay, you've seen this in baseball. We watch a Derek Jeter in 96. Okay? Then you look at him in 2008. What is he? He's heavier. He's filled out.
Right.
Okay? And that's a guy I wholeheartedly believe with all my heart never took any drugs.
Yeah.
Okay? That was the natural progression. Males increase in bone density, maybe up to 28, 29 years of age. If you consistently tax the body like an MMA fighter does, you're constantly increasing probably connective tissue density to an extent, muscle density, maybe organ density in size.
Wow.
And then you got increased bone density. So that is the pure weight itself. There's a gradual increase as an athlete as you progress, even if you stay lean. That's number one. Number two, what happens is the obvious. It's simply recovery, Jason. So I'm 22 years old. I can go out and do 10 rounds with Jose Cuervo, come to the gym next day, and I'm gonna be, if I'm a UFC fighter, I'm gonna be as good as I was as almost if I didn't train.
Right.
But as you age and you pull that water out, let's say at 33, you pull those electrolytes out, you pull the carbohydrates out, independent of how good a shape you're in, when you go onto that scale, that 36-hour window isn't worth the same in rehydration capacity, glycogen synthesis capacity, electrolyte replacement capacity. It's not the same as when you were 23. So that window of what was maybe you weigh in at 10 a.m. on a Friday, and now you're fighting at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., that's 2 weeks when you're 22. But all of a sudden, that 36 hours may be like a 20-hour window, because as we age, the body just does not have the ability to respond that quickly. And one more closing thought is some guys do, not all, but some guys get a metabolic adaptation. I mean, if you look at some studies and some of the research, it's epidemiological in like Holland, you will see that later in life, it appears that weight-cut athletes, kickboxers, boxers, wrestlers, well, they actually have a higher BMI than the general population. They tend to get a little bit heavier later in life, and that may be to the fact that those constant weight cuts make that metabolism become a little too efficient, or adaptive thermogenesis, if you will. So the point is, you got probably three major factors. One, you're constantly adding more weight and quality, good weight, but still you're adding more weight to the body as you train over the years. Two, you don't have the physiological response time that you did when you were 25, right? Where you could recover in an hour.
Yeah.
And number three, if you've got a wrestling history and you've been cutting weight since you're 11, now you're 34 years old, you have a metabolism that has a little bit hard time, or a harder time, to get rid of that fat sometimes and drop that weight than it did many, many years ago. So those are just a handful of factors that make it tougher.
I mean, this is why we have you on, this detailed scientific breakdown. And then also, we've learned you like Jose Cuervo. Is that one of your favorites?
Actually, well, when it comes to shots, I'm more of a rum guy.
Oh.
Let me tell you what, I can go to the top of the food chain. You can ask a few of my fellow coaches. We'll go right to the 151 and see who can hang. Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right, so we'll continue on with the Luke Rockhold talk, because also there's been a lot of conversation about him maybe fighting Michael Bisping as a possible opponent in his retirement fight. And Rockhold actually said in a Flow Combat article, he would retire if he lost to Bisping. Then Bisping actually, I think he was on Twitter, or maybe it was Instagram, asked fans, should I retire this guy and fight him? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that one? That one was fun just because it has so much history. It's easy to sell. I would give, for all the talk about Michael Bisping ducking opponents as a champion, he would surely take on a super difficult fight on his way out. So, I mean, if you had to choose between Gustafsson or Bisping, who would you prefer to see Rockhold probably fight? What would be more interesting to you?
Well, okay, I think they'd be interesting, and then I think they'd be sheer fun. I think you could diverge there. I don't know. There's something about Bisping that absolutely irks Luke, and that makes it wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that was before he got punched in the face and knocked out by him, right?
Yep.
So I think there's something inherent in that really makes me want to see that happen again. Although I do think Luke would come in with a little bit of a chip on the shoulder and probably fight him very smart this time and make sure that doesn't happen again. So I think that from an entertainment perspective, and honestly, what might be a better, more interesting fight, I'd probably take the Bisping matchup because I know it's not that I don't think Luke on his best day can do well against, going up at 205 and fighting Gustafsson. That he can do. Yeah. But if he's not on his best game, I think it's a long night for him.
Yeah, he could definitely.
You're getting hit by a big man.
Yeah.
And you've twice been knocked out by guys who are significantly smaller than that. Well, let me take that back. Romero's not. Romero's a bull.
That's true. Yeah.
But nevertheless, there's a lot of leverage in that big man. He's a decent puncher. And he's a pretty good athlete. So I think from an entertainment perspective, something that would be fun to watch and probably offer more exchange and back and forth, I would go with Bisping.
Yeah, I completely agree because it checks off a lot of interesting things, and you already nailed that. I mean, it checks off the entertainment value. Yeah. It has a story. It can easily sell. And also, I mean, in the end, Bisping's retiring. He's on his way out. So this is a fun fight, money kind of fight, and it'd be headlining pay-per-view. Luke Rockhold, as far as we know, isn't leaving. I mean, he could. I mean, he seems like the guy, like, you know what, I'm done. I'll go model, whatever. But he's going to be around. What is the benefit? Like, it's a high risk, it's a win-lose big time for Luke Rockhold. That, okay, let's say he goes up and fights Gustafsson and beats him, a huge win, but he's not going to be the favorite. There's probably a better chance he loses. What is the benefit of him going up, having this big fight at 205, this former champion moving up to 205, and then losing it possibly badly? It doesn't do much for Gustafsson because he probably should win that fight. So if you really want to get the most out of Luke Rockhold long term, I think you would rather have him work his way up in the division, even if he gets a title fight in 2 fights, still prove himself just like everybody else. Rafael Dos Anjos, the former champion, had to do by moving up. Donald Cerrone, like jumping right up to a guy who's arguably the number one contender doesn't make a lot of sense. And you possibly ruin a really good talent by throwing him in there in a short-term idea fight against Gustafsson. I just don't think it makes much sense long term. But then again, the UFC isn't thinking long term in their matchmaking recently, so it's weird.
You're right on with that. No, I don't think there's anything to add to that. Unless again we're not inside the camp, unless Luke, let's just say a coach says to him, dude, when you were 214. You could punch all day, you could kick all day, you had a great tank, and you were killing it. You had twice the power, and maybe we don't know that. Where Luke generally says, 185 pounds and 6'4" is just too much anymore, and I can't do it. And maybe he really performed optimally at a much heavier weight. But outside of that, from a billing standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, couldn't agree with you more. I think if he's comfortable, and it hasn't been horrendous weight cut for him, then stay in that because he can turn it around. The division is all over the map right now, and at any given point, somebody can step in and wear a strap again. It's really the way, right? So unless it's been hell for him, and I have no information accordingly, I don't see why you would leave it.
Yeah. I mean, moving on from there, I mean, last weekend or 2 weekends ago, last weekend, I mean, one of my a heartbreaking moment as a fan. I've been a fan. My friend, I have a close friend. He got me into the sport. He got me into liking Frankie Edgar. He was the one to put me on to him beating Tyson Griffin, and I became a fan pretty much from like the Sean Shirk win on. Like, man, this guy's legit. And plus, he's Jersey, but he's a tri-state local kind of guy. Like, we appreciate that. But he loses to Brian Ortega. First time he's ever been finished either by a TKO, KO, submission, whatever. The guy is just an Iron Man, just durable. So to see him lose that way was tough. Now, the question is, and I wrote an article recently for MMAsucker.com. You guys can go check it out. It's called Long Live the Legend of Frankie Edgar, where I break down he's still a very relevant fighter, but his days of fighting for titles are probably over. So where does Frankie go at now 36 years old? I mean, it's a lot of interesting questions. I want to see what your thoughts are. Does making a move to bantamweight, is that worth it? Because he's hinted at, I could probably cut a little more. Maybe he gets an instant title shot there. You never know. That might be tough, but is bantamweight worth it? Maybe a return to lightweight. Maybe he should go back at 155. Maybe he can get a quick title shot there. I don't think it's likely, or should he just be a money weight guy and just fight whatever the best interesting fights are that make the most money, that headline? What do you think he should do at this point? I can't. It seems the lower the weight class, aging is just much more unforgiving on a fighter. So being 36 going on 37 at 155 and down. As a fan and as a professional, a long-time professional, top-notch coach in this industry, what do you think would be the best thing for him?
First I'm going to just start with you. He's that's a great kid, man. When you're my age, you call him a kid. And you can't, and Jason, I think you and I talked about it too. Like, and I had texted Coach Mark Henry, whom I love, and Ricardo Almeida. He's got a good group of guys behind him. They are a genuinely good team, genuinely good people, and he's a genuinely good person. Yeah. And I think it was indicative of how not that there's anything to dislike about Brian, but people really felt bad. Yeah. In a sport where people clandestinely root for you to lose, and don't like to see you at the top. I've never seen so many people be down about Frankie losing like that because of the utmost respect, love, and the fact that he is a great guy and arguably right in there with some of the best ever, right there, right? Yep. Most time in the cage. So at this point, couple of, many title bouts, and what's he, 3 and 4 in title bouts?
Right? That's what I mentioned the story. Yeah, he's lost 4, won 3. Right.
Yep. Okay. I don't know what they want. I don't know what they believe. So, in essence, I'm not saying what I think he should do as much as what I would like him to do, because I respect Frankie too much to say what I think he should do. I do agree with you that 35 is just, it's a tough pull. If he's going to go down again, that's not easy on the body. Yeah. He functions very well at 45. To go back up, I mean, look how big the 45ers are now. Brian looked like he was 6'4". Yeah. Now you're going to, now you're potentially going against at 36, 37, a 55er who arguably should be a welterweight, and is highly skilled. So I don't see going, anywhere other than staying around feather and staying 45 if he wanted to continue. From a fan perspective, there's nothing left in my mind to prove. But that's up to Frankie. So, yeah, I would like to see him because people love him. People love to watch him fight. I'd like to see him get those money fights if available. Let him make some more. He is exciting. He always puts on a show. He's always prepared. And at this particular point in his career, he's been in that cage a lot. He's banged up that body a lot. I'd like to see him continue to reap some financial reward if that's his objective for the last year or two, whether he decides to stay in there. I don't like him moving from this class right now from a physiological standpoint, right. Nothing else. Yeah. From pure physiology. I think staying at home as you get older, in a particular, not too high, not too low, is probably the best way to optimize your physiology. So I'm with you on that. What's your point on the ladder? Take some money fights if they're there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want bantamweight at all because I think the guys are just only going to get faster. And when he was at 55, he was the fast guy. He was the frenetic guy, can move around. Then he went to 145, and the guys started getting faster. Then all of a sudden, Frankie started wrestling a lot more. In the Cub Swanson fight, Cub Swanson was doing well with the standing. He started to wrestle. Yair Rodriguez, he wrestled. I mean, he became a wrestler to mitigate the speed disadvantage. So I think if he went down to you're going to put him in a big fight. If he went for Cody Garbrandt, maybe he can wrestle him, but I just feel like Cody Garbrandt has a kind of scrambling ability to get right back up, and then it's a speed problem again. I don't want him to lose that fight. I think your point's great, 145. The only thing is, to me, he's exhausted most of the 145. He's helped clean up the division other than a champion. So I kind of would hope, in a weird nostalgia way, considering that was a division he won a title, I would like to see him go 155, and also because I think the money fights are 155, because the fight I would love to see, and I think it would definitely headline a pay-per-view. It's a fight I think most people would be happy with, and it would draw this man out if they pay him. Who wouldn't want to see Frankie versus Nate Diaz at 155? That could be amazing. Or even Frankie versus Eddie Alvarez, a battle of former champion. I think those fights would be great fights, and I think he can win either fight. They'd be fascinating to watch. So I think even at his age, maybe he. What is your opinion on the guy? Do you feel, or is it just really based on the fighter themselves, or is there a belief that maybe if you're going up in weight, you become faster, or is it really on a person-to-person basis on something like that?
No, I definitely think it's person-to-person.
Okay,
it really is where that body is situated, right? So. Some people could become faster by going up because they've depleted themselves too much in a particular cut.
Right.
And we were just using Luke as an analogy, again, not with me having any knowledge. Maybe he's faster at 210, 212 than he is, having to go all the way down and make it back up to that weight.
Right.
So I think that is definitely individual because there are so many factors. There are structural factors. You got a guy who's 6'1" making lightweight, and then you got a guy who's 5'5" making lightweight, and how they perform and the way their muscle fiber type, their endurance, all those things are going to come into play in what either makes them very successful at that weight or makes them have, both. You're going to have problems in any weight, and you're going to be good at, and you're going to have advantages at any particular weight. So I think that it's very individual as to where that person is going to optimize as many parameters in their performance as possible. And like I said, you can bump up, hey, I'm stronger, wonderful, but I fatigue quicker. Right. I can go down, I'm faster, but I could get knocked over running into a moth. I've seen guys do that too. So it really is, it's a tough balance, man. And only Frankie knows, Mark Henry, those guys know. Yeah. So like I said, I don't know where he belongs, wherever he wants, and wherever he wants to go. I'm a fan, like I said, of him and his whole team. So he'll know, I think, too, as such an experienced fighter. No, I'm going to go be better at 55. He'll know. Yeah. And he'll come out, and whether he wins or not, he'll put out a good 55. So, but that's a wonderful fight idea that you bring up. That could be fun. Diaz
So speaking of another legendary figure in the sport, but looked at in a very different light, but he's still a legend, is the recent news Bellator has signed Mirko Cro Cop, and they've already got a fight for him. He's going to be fighting Roy Nelson at Bellator 200, which is going to be in England. Big card, a lot of big names already on that card. This is going to be interesting. However, in 2015 November, he was one of the first guys to test positive during the early stages of the USADA testing in the UFC. So he got a 2-year ban, and of course he disappeared from fighting in the US, but he's been fighting in Rising and some of these other organizations abroad. Now, a lot of people are bothered by the fact that because the belief is you get a ban, that should really ban you from the sport. But since it is the United States Anti-Doping Agency, I guess he felt that if he's fighting in Japan, that doesn't mean he can't fight there. So a lot of people bothered by it. They feel like he hasn't really held up to his ban, but Bellator is still going to fight him. I haven't seen any stories or anything about that he's not going to be sanctioned, so he is. Correct. What are your thoughts on that? Is that kind of ethically wrong, morally wrong, that he has been away from the U.S. 2 years and he's coming back? Or did he just kind of play the system the right way? He just went and fought outside the U.S. and he is doing what he is probably fair to do considering the guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, look, right? I mean, you boot him out of UFC. And he's got a huge following, right? I mean, in Europe and Croatia, and that's why it being in England is smart, because it's a much shorter jump for a big fan base as far as people getting a better time to watch him fight, and those making it over to watch the fight. And so one organization is always going to look for an advantage or edge on another. And I can't speak to the efficacy of every organization's testing protocols, particularly those overseas. I don't, they claim to do A, B, C, or D, and there are different organizations involved. So obviously, what did he do? He went within the rules of the other organizations that say, well, we don't care if you got banned out of UFC and you got a 2-year ban. You're going to make me money. And in the end, right, the promoters don't care. I mean, the promoters don't, like, unfortunately, they couldn't give a flying about these guys. And what amazes me is, like, after you make a couple $100 million, can even by accident, maybe you start caring about these kids?
Yeah.
And Cro Cop's not a kid, but my point to that is, what did he do? All right, well, you guys boot me out. I can go here or there, which tells you that it's a lot looser out there, and the playing field is going to be different. I'm not saying definitively, but Europe has a different reputation when it comes to farmer than we do.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit more, and then some of the Europeans may get mad at me about it, but I think it's a little bit more liberal than we've been here, or at least are attempting to be with the UFC and USADA. So is it morally wrong? It's no more morally wrong than it is for a promoter who knows that he's done this and just doesn't give a flying and to shove him in a fight anyway. Now, are you going to get one fighting championships in this organization here and Ryzen and Bellator to worry about what UFC said? Not if there are people that love this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going to, they want to watch him fight.
Yep. And
if it's 4 months after a UFC ban and they can make big money in another country, they're gonna wash their hands of what happened here. So did he do anything wrong per se? No. I mean, he took advantage of the system, and is it morally wrong? Well, I'll be honest with you. Here's what I will say, and I'll say this publicly, particularly as a guy who hasn't had an ergogenic aid that is pharmaceutical in his body since he was 20. He did them and hated them and never touched them again. And I'm not condemning anyone who does them, not by any means. It's just not for me. I hate those things. And I did a little, did one-time thing, and it just, for me, it's not good.
Wow, so we're learning PD use and Jose Cuervo from Tony Ricci in this.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Oh, yeah, when I was 20 years old, I tried them because I did a stupid bodybuilding show.
Yeah.
And but, I weighed 200 pounds at 5'7" with abs without it. So that's just.
But were they banned? Was that a banned thing at the time?
No, it wasn't banned.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not like you were really breaking any rules. It was just whatever at the time.
Right, but I claim how much now, so that I don't like it. But I will say this: I know a couple. I have a good friend who's a very good boxer named Chris Algieri, and I can testify on my heart that I think Chris is 100% clean, and he has stepped in against that, into that boxing ring against guys who were probably 100% not. And my point to that is, don't flatter yourself as a fighter if you're on drugs and you're spanking someone who isn't, because you do have a huge advantage, huge in recovery, in potential power. Now, you could misuse the drugs, right? Destroy your body, get too heavy, get too big. But my point to that is we got to keep an eye on that. This is not baseball. It's one human being who knows how to punch is taking something that is super physiological and really changing their physiology significantly, and they're slamming their fist into another human being's face. That's pretty dangerous. Yeah. So I get it. Some guys will say, screw you, Tony, everybody should be doing it. Well, that's fine. That's their perspective. But we got to keep an eye on that, Jason, because if you got guys who are sneaking in, and they are doing the drug, like I said, and you're beating a guy who's not, don't pat yourself on the back too much. you had a really big advantage. So just something to think about. I don't know if Cro Cop, I'm not going to get on him and say, oh, it was immoral. He went where it's going. It comes down to money. Nobody cares. A lot of people don't care if he takes $10,000, which he does, and $10,000 a month and stuff, as long as it makes them money. That's what it really comes down to. So that's what you have to negotiate more than anything.
And I think this shows the need for, it'll never happen because you don't have it in other sports necessarily, but it might be worth it to MMA lead the way to just have some worldwide sanctioning organization, or at least I know they have the ACB, the ABC organization now that came up with these new rules that some of these states are using, but if there was like a worldwide organization that everybody kind of followed, that would negate these things from happening. Maybe that organization uses WADA, and then everybody has WADA, and then there's no problems. Everybody can't do anything. But you have the UFC using USADA, you have Bellator using nothing, you have ACB. I remember there was Fedor Emelianenko's brother Alexander. He had like hepatitis, and he was fighting in Europe somewhere. Like, this is the craziness of it. like you shouldn't have that happen. But in a blood sport, a guy with hepatitis is fighting in a blood sport. So
back. Well, again, what does it come down to though?
Yeah.
Somebody is going to say, all right, we got WADA, and here are 5 major sanctioning bodies, okay? And then they're going to go get a bunch of guys who have a following, who are getting older, who want to take drugs, and they're going to have them set up a fight in the middle of nowhere and make money on it.
Exactly.
So it's not that you couldn't get the agreement. You're probably always going to have some pirates who move outside of that,
And that's why you can't get a union. That's why it's so hard to get even a union, even in boxing too, because to get everybody on the same page in such an individualized sport, it's like damn near impossible. But continuing on the theme of suspensions from sanctioning drug testing organizations, Cynthia Calvillo had to accept a 6-month suspension from USADA after in-competition tests came back positive for marijuana metabolites. This is for many, considering myself, this is a silly ass whole thing, because I'm on board. I think marijuana should just be legalized across the board. It's already legalized in many states. It's legalized for medical use. Like, it's just silly, the whole thing that we have federal laws that make it illegal, state laws make it legal. Like, there's so much confusion. What's your opinion on it? Is this something that maybe sanctioning organizations need to take it upon themselves and say, okay, maybe we should just take this off of the substance list? Like, should USADA kind of just take this off the list? Like, this is not really a big deal. What's your opinion? Is weed at all a performance enhancer?
I think if you're painting the Sistine Chapel, maybe, and you're on your back and chewing out and going, whoa, this looks good, I think I'll add a little bit more chartreuse here or whatever. Perhaps in a psychedelic capacity. Yeah. Now, THC itself, when you smoke it, I think the research is pretty good that it impairs reaction time, performance, what do you call that? Some spatial awareness, time perception, right? You think time is going faster or longer. So in a smoked form, I'm not an expert. I haven't read through all the literature on marijuana as an ergogenic aid. I don't see any if you're smoking it. Now, there are some arguments for CBD oil and depending upon the ratio of THC to CBD or THVC, whatever the liver converts. Again, I'm not an expert on the mechanisms of marijuana metabolism or CBD metabolism. But nevertheless, while it may relax you, it may cut the anxiety edge off. There's a host of things that could do that. Mm-hmm. You can go do yoga and do that before.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right. And sometimes being relaxed and having some excessive parasympathetic influence is probably not good. If they have no clear, decisive, conclusive definition of how this is, enhancing performance, then grow up. Okay. First of all, to the United States government.
Yeah.
Grow up.
Yeah.
Okay? Grow the hell up. All right? Well, and you got the wrong guy here because I'm not a fan. There's probably nothing I dislike more than politicians. But the point to this is we're dealing with a substance that probably is safer than alcohol use, probably, depending upon dosing, okay? And if USADA, WADA, okay, cannot clearly define under specific dosaging or specific ratios of THC to CBD an ergogenic benefit, then let's get out of policing it morally. That's not their job. Their job is, does it enhance performance?
Yeah.
And we don't have any conclusive evidence that, it definitively does A, B, or C. And the other thing to think about, too, sure, like something like a steroid, it affects the brain, but more of the effects are peripheral. Okay, you get stronger, we know that, and it can affect your mood. But the complexities of marijuana on the brain make it a much more individual response. It's something like taking this particular drug to get stronger, right? So my perspective on that is, if people want to smoke weed because they sleep a little, if they sleep better, okay, I've literally heard people argue that as a performance enhancer. Well, I can go buy, it may not work well, but some people buy melatonin then and try to sleep better. So I see no reason ever for fighters to have to go get marijuana exemptions, okay? And, obviously, depending upon where you are, you can argue the legality of it. But that's not WADA and USADA's job, in my opinion. Grow up, leave the athletes alone. You don't mind them beating the living hell out of themselves. And then if they get something that makes them relax, you jump all over them for it. It was kind of the ridiculousness of, even when they jumped all over, and I'm not a huge fan, but Ray Lewis for deer antler spray. Okay, something that was OTC at the time. You can order it online. Oh my God, you're using that, and they jump all over. But they didn't have a problem potentially asking him to play 2 more games a year and destroy his body further. So personally, if it helps an athlete sleep, if it helps their muscles relax, hey, you're just going to get a better performer out there or a better fighter because they slept more. Leave them alone. It's absurd to me.
And
Absolutely absurd.
If they're doing, they're lumping marijuana in probably with cocaine because that's illegal, whatever. But, if you're allowing alcohol, which can impair people, then you find a middle ground and make an executive decision that this is best for everybody. Perfect example. Testosterone replacement, you can go to a doctor and get. Hell, you got infomercials right now with Frank Thomas selling testosterone on the TV. So you can go get. But they made the decision, no, you know what? Athletes should not get testosterone. We're outlawing that because it's unfair. Older guys need to get older. It's not a fair advantage they're getting with experience. Okay, you made that. That it really does not have to be outlawed. Anybody can really go get it now. So then make the same decision and say, okay, you know what? Weed really is not enhancing anything. It's legal in many states. Let's be different. Let's be progressive and make this something that is fine. And if you take it, whatever, or maybe even take it in certain levels. Like if you can't have this high level because then they'll call it the Snoop Dogg level. You don't want to get to the Snoop Dogg level of smoking weed, but otherwise, it's not a big deal. It's so silly. It's so weird. I don't get it. You have an athlete like Cynthia Calvillo who's like, even though she's 30, she's a rising talent. Now she's got to go sit out for 6 months, can't make money. She's probably not making big money anyway because the women are unfairly paid compared to the men. So it's a sad situation. I mean, but going off from that, I want to talk about a more positive thing, and that is like how the growth of the sport abroad really is flourishing big time. I mean, you have Georgi Karahanyan has recently signed with ACB, which is a very big signing for them. He was released by Bellator. Norman Park, a UFC veteran, he fought recently, or I think he's going to fight at KSW. That's a ACB, for the people that know. We've talked about it here, but ACB is a major promotion in Russia. Phil went and trained at their training gym. KSW is a major organization in Poland. ATT has ACB fighters, like I mentioned, with Phil working with them. ONE FC in China is getting really big in the Asian market. Fight Nights Global, another Russian promotion, are actually going to do a show in Brazil soon. They're going to do shows around the world. I mean, you were a guy, and this was one of the fun things when I was interviewing for the story I was writing on you, that you were there in the very beginning and you went to see Pride. You were around in the industry when it was just UFC and Pride and a bunch of regional stuff and not much going on. Now you have like 7 to 8 legitimate organizations. I mean, even King of the Cage, Bama, all these, whatever. They guys can go make money. Like, how great is that for trainers too? Because they got to train the fighters and fighters that there are these avenues to make legitimate money outside of just being a UFC fighter.
Yes, great. And here's the thing. I do this for two reasons. I love fight physiology. It fascinates me, Jason, that to try to isolate what really goes on in the human body, or how many different things go on, better yet, in the human body during a fight. But simultaneously, a lot of these kids are good kids. And I really cheer for them. And a lot of them are good kids. They're hard workers. They do the right thing. And I just want to help them have a better career. And so my point to that is, we could argue capitalism causes a lot of problems. It does. Capitalism solves a lot of problems. It does. That's the inherent nature of anything that is human itself or created by humans. So I think it is wonderful. Look at all the people in Asia, and why shouldn't one expand? Why shouldn't people in the United States get other opportunities? And I don't want the UFC having this much control over these young kids. I'm sorry to say that. All right, I'm a big fan of the UFC. But the problem was 5 years ago, you got 150 kids in the lightweight division that could potentially be good fighters, and 100 of them would pay to fight, would actually pay to get on TV. So you can pay these kids peanuts. Well, now it needs a little competition. If they want the bigger fighters, UFC, they want the better guys, they want to draw people in from all over the world, they want to draw people in from an Asian market, let them pay a little bit. These are athletes. They're good. Again, most of them pretty decent kids who are working hard, get in their day out, wrestle their tail off, punch their tail off, go lift weights, go do conditioning. For the most part, a lot of the times eat boring food all the time. So let them make a few bucks for themselves. I'm ecstatic that this is happening. Absolutely ecstatic. And it probably in the long run will help the UFC get some of their crap back together, because they're a little bit all over the map, and they may have to tighten their ship up if they want to compete with these guys. You're losing overseas markets. That's what you're losing. And they've been after that, right? I mean, Conor was wonderful. I still think they wanted, what's his face there, to beat Stipe, because you could have had a whole nother continent involved in the UFC had he won. Where's he from? Cameroon.
Yep.
Yep, right, Francis? So my point to all this is good. In the end, the organizations that are serious, again, the owners, the investors, let them make millions. That's fine. Let them make big time money. But if you're making $300 million and you're willing to spread 50 of that 300 across the board for these young fighters, that's a big deal to them. Yeah. And somebody's going to do it and force someone else to step it up. So great. Let the competition go global. Let the local organizations have to work harder, put out a decent product, and fork up more money to stay alive. I'm all for it. And you brought up one other wonderful point. It's more work for more trainers, more coaches, and more young aspiring fighters. I think it's awesome and the best thing to happen to the sport in a while.
All right, so last topic. Speaking of young fighters, this past week on the same card as the Frankie Edgar fight, Cyborg's fight on the main. I don't know if it was the main attraction of the prelims, but Mackenzie Dern, she debuts in her first fight. Highly talked about. A lot of talk and everything about her. She's a big time BJJ practitioner, a big star. Her debut was less than impressive. I mean, what is your opinion on her debut if you did get to see it? And for trainers working with a fighter, I mean, she was on her 5th fight. She's now 6-0, split decision victory. Is there a minimum you want to have a fighter fight? Like, should there be a 5-fight minimum, a 10-fight minimum before they reach the levels of the UFC? Or is it really based on fight? Because a guy like Cain Velasquez, I think he had 3 fights or 2 fights before he came to the UFC. Brock had 1 fight. Is it really solely based on a fighter? Or should there at least be, like, say, a 5 to 6 fight minimum before a guy or girl jumps at that UFC level?
Well, that's another, in all seriousness, another great question. And, you're mentioning like Kane and Brock, I think, and again, those divisions, though, are generally lighter in number.
Yeah,
so it's a little bit more feasible for that to happen, right?
Yep.
I mean, you're not doing that in the lightweight division, in the UFC, in the male lightweight. Like, you better have a little time under your belt, right?
Yeah.
You got scores of fighters who are ready and hungry. So I do think, one, it's division specific. I think it's, and you really have to look at the background and the integration. I mean, is it preferable? I would say sure. I'm not the skill coach. I can tell you that certainly from a physiological perspective, it doesn't hurt to have the body undergo a little bit more fight experience because, there's not just preparation of the physical, there's preparation of the mind, there's how to govern nerves, there's how to monitor and how to maintain and sustain energy so that you're not wasting that. And that does come with experience. So I would say to you, here's the bottom line. We talked about it already. It doesn't matter if you got half a fight. If they like the way you look and they think you're going to sell, they're going to put you in there.
Yeah.
And from an ideal perspective, does experience matter? Well, let's put it this way. It certainly hasn't hurt in boxing with guys like Triple G and Lomachenko.
Yeah.
With the 200, everybody from Kazakhstan coming in and Ukraine with 200 fights under their belt. And you're looking at guys who are completely poised. But I do think here's something that's worthy of consideration. When did they start? You know what I mean? Like, you've got somebody like, they did jiu-jitsu as well as she does. But how long has the other background been there?
Yeah.
That's a major factor because you could argue anybody's entrance right away if they're unilaterally good in something. He or she's a great Thai fighter. So let's throw her in there against another good boxer.
Yep.
That's going to sell. Are they potentially ready for real MMA? Probably not. But if the matchup's right, they're going to fix it up and try to make for an exciting fight. So I think what really comes into consideration is looking at them and genuinely try to get an overview of how, when it comes to MMA, that is, how well-rounded are they truly? Are you rushing a Muay Thai champion into MMA? Are you rushing a World Jiu-Jitsu champion into MMA who's barely been hit? Right? Or you even taken a D1 national wrestler who's a complete stud. And I've seen them just, need different adjustments to the up and down level changes and getting punched. And there's nothing against wrestling. I'm the hugest fan in the world. They adjust probably quicker than any other athlete. But the point to all that is, Jason, I really think you're pushing people in there a lot of the times that are unilaterally potent until they're trilaterally competent. They don't belong there. That's the metric which I would judge it on. Can they genuinely hold themselves or hold their own in a striking fight? If they're wonderful in jiu-jitsu, are they going to sit down there and get their jaw broken and their nose broken from the guard?
Yeah.
And that's what you would weigh it on. Hey, but what are you going to do? The UFC calls. You're going to be on TV. You're a skill coach who maybe has no other fighter. Yeah. Here's your chance. No one's going to stop it, right? So that's how I would judge it. If I would look at their competencies and say, he or she is ready to hang with anybody in any one, and independent of how the fight goes.
Yeah, I mean, and it showed in her debut. Like, personally, I thought she lost the fight. I thought it was a close fight.
Yes, I watched it. Yep.
Yeah, I thought she lost the fight. Yeah, she got some takedowns late. I mean, and it just shows, like, one, her striking wasn't there. Not to say that her striking was bad or anything like that, but it really wasn't there. And it's not like they threw her in the deep end of the division either. I mean, she fought, like, kind of a middle-of-the-road, back end of the division fighter. So I thought she didn't look that great in the striking. And this just shows you the genius of certain, like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based guys, especially, and I'm not saying she's on this level, but she's getting the kind of hype in terms of her BJJ on this level is like a Damian Maia, and that, you can be a jiu-jitsu guy, and that's great, but to take people down at this stage in the sport with just jiu-jitsu takedowns is very difficult. Like, you have to have, like, exceptional either athleticism, strength, or takedown skills, which Damian Maia has, because he did wrestling. He's done a lot of wrestling work the last, 5-6 years.
As a wrestler, you got it.
Yeah, Jacare is a phenomenal athlete, and he's strong, so he can kind of bulldoze, and he has amazing technique. So if you're not exceptional to take people down, and you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of practitioner, I mean, you're going to have problems in there. And she lucked out in that she got the win, but you would think they probably progress her to a harder opponent. If she's not to the level, she could really go in there and get hurt by somebody who, could definitely just shut down her shot. So, I mean, she's got the talent. She's got a long way to go. I mean, you already get that sense behind her. This is going to be a golden girl kind of UFC promoted fighter. It is what it is. That's how they do things. But, I mean, that's all our conversation today for this FSP Overtime 8. And I just want to mention for all you guys, like I mentioned, the MMAsucker.com. Long live the legend of Frankie Edgar story. Also, I have a story on SureDog. It's called Getting Technical on Calf Kicks. It's breaking down the calf kick and how prevalent it's become in the sport, how deadly it's a subtle killer in the sport. You've seen it a lot with Rory McDonald versus Douglas Lima, Jeremy Stevens Melendez. I was very fortunate, lucky to get quotes from Dr. Paul Gavoni, great striking coach, the legend Ray Longo, and from Mike Brown, got me a quote for the piece. So go check out those two things. That's on SureDog. The other stories on MMA Sucker. As always, Tony Ricci just bringing amazing information, the wealth of knowledge, the scientific thinking. Much appreciated for stepping in, Phil. Let him know if any of your social media, your Instagram, where you can see tons of video of Tony working with fighters at Longo and YMMA, your Twitter, the Facebook, your Fight Shape. Give them all the information where they can go look you up.
Yeah, so just on Facebook, Tony Ricci, and I got a lot of vids up there. You'll see a real, an ugly guy comes up real fast under that. I think so. And I just do a lot of work on Instagram, and my business name is Fight Shape. My Instagram is just Fight Shape with an underslash in my last name, Ricci. And I offer just, some good videos and discussion on there. So if people want to join in and follow me there, that'd be wonderful. That'd be great.
All right, as for me, you can find me on Instagram, Jericho Vendetta, on Twitter, Cheap Seats Chat. Don't forget, Fight Strength Podcast on Facebook. Fight Strength _ for the podcast's Twitter account on Twitter. Also, of course, giving a shout out to Phil, throwing in some plugs for him. Everything for him, the Instagram, the Twitter, the Facebook, Daru Strong. Look him up there. He'll be back next week. This episode, as always, will look at our Fight Strength podcast episodes will be Monday morning at 9:30, just like everything else. You can find us on Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Player FM, YouTube. Comment, send us questions, let us know what you think. You want to sponsor, always email us at fightstrengthpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, big, huge thank you to Tony Ricci. I am Jason Burgos. That is it for FSP Overtime 8. Bye-bye.
Take care.